Hey Murdoch, have you ever heard of the Didache?
The Didache? Man, get out of here and go read your Bible.
All right, welcome to Your Church Friends podcast. I'm Chris.
I'm Didache.
So, I would say, through my marriage, Justine has created a lot of adventures for me and gotten me into some things that I would say I've never would have put myself in a situation.
I've told you how quick my brain thinks, and
Yeah.
I will just, after every word, keep finishing someone's sentence.
Uh-huh.
That sentence had so many endings to it that I more expected than how it ended.
Yeah.
So, man, your marriage is in a good place compared to what I thought.
Oh, yeah.
But these adventures, what
I'm pretty
adventures?
sure the podcast would be like, so here's my marriage. So when we first bought our house, we went and we were like getting a bunch of stuff like out of it, remodeling the inside, some minor things we could do, landscaping things, cut down a tree, giant tree that was in our front yard. And she was like, we could just take it to the dump. And I was like, let's just get one of those big old dumpsters, throw it all in there. They pick it up and they take it. She's like, no. My dad has a truck. We'll load up his truck and we'll just take all this stuff to the junkyard or to the trash area where they like the trash cans places go and they dump all the stuff. And I was like, okay, sure. She's like, it'll be a lot cheaper. They weigh by the pound, yada, yada, yada. So we did it and we pull into where all the trash cans or trash cars dump the trash of everybody in the city. And this place reeked.
Yeah, I would think so.
It just smelled. And I'm like throwing stuff out of her truck, dad's truck, shoveling stuff out with my nose covered, just looking at her like, what did you get me into? This is ridiculous. We did it like 4 more times because we had a bunch of stuff. And at that point, I was already in. On our honeymoon, we were driving to get a massage. I had never got one before. And or even the better part of driving to our honeymoon in Arizona. This is before GPS.
So you printed out MapQuest?
Printed out MapQuest and all that stuff for everywhere we needed to be and our reservations to our hotel. And we decided to leave at midnight to beat traffic and we were young and crazy. And it then halfway there, she's like, oh, I think I forgot the papers. And I'm like, it's midnight. Or at this point, it's like 3 a.m. And I'm like, what? We're not turning back. What's going on? She ended up finding them. On the way to the massage place, it took us like straight into a mountain. And I was like, where do I go here? And she's like, the paper says straight. And I was like, I can't.
The amount of people that have driven off of mountains because the GPS just said, I should keep going. There's no road. I don't know, it says.
So I would think after all these years, there's many other stories in between then and now. I would be used to it. But just recently, quite possibly one of the worst adventure experiences ever. We're doing some landscaping in our front yard, and we want to put wood chips in certain areas where we grow stuff in the front, like little plants and stuff like that. And then in the middle, we're going to have grass, and we were going to use some around the back around our chicken coop. And she was like, yeah, but I could get this company. They deliver wood chips, and it's all free. They'll just drop it off. And I was like, okay, fine. So they deliver it, and I go to take the kids to school. And when I come back, our driveway from the very back of it to literally the street, and this has to be like over 20 feet long, maybe 30, and about a 5-foot mountain high, 7 of them is filled with wood chips.
Wow.
Yeah. And when I use the wood chips I didn't even put a dent in this thing. So we have now for like probably 2 to 3 weeks wood chips. Luckily, people have come and taken some.
Were you allowed to tell them that you're just doing a small project?
I don't know, because I wasn't there when they dumped it out.
Just like, yeah, we need to cover the whole backyard.
Yeah, she was like, we need to cover everything. I wasn't there when they dropped it off, so I really would have no idea how much they would have delivered. But thankfully, my family came that night just so we could move it so we could park a car in the driveway. I'm sitting on top of this mountain of wood chips, and I just looked at her and I was like, this is the worst experience as far as like adventures you've gotten me into. Like this one is the worst. My back was hurting. I was sore. I was tired. Pretty good at shoveling now.
I say, it sounds like you're just blaming her for you being old.
Yeah, it's part of it. But
I'm tired of my back hurts. Why are you blaming me?
We spent probably like 3 weeks of this, and now my ultimate idea to get rid of these wood chips, because we've used them everywhere we need to, people have come and got some, is just start a fire in the backyard somewhere.
Oh, I'm down.
Yeah.
I like fires.
Yeah. So
bonfires.
That's been what's going on with me in my life the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, I saw some of the pictures online, but I didn't realize it was quite like that. You want to know a really good segue, but it's not as good because now I'm mentioning it?
What is it?
That sounds like such a crazy adventure, almost like us getting into this adventure of Didache.
Oh, yeah, that is a good segue. I like that one. Yeah, that is a crazy adventure. We're going to be covering the Didache in this Excluded Books of the Bible season. We got the Didache, we got the Shepherd of Hermas, and we have the most controversial of all, First Enoch. I think it's going to be fun and exciting going through them all.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. So we'll get started with the Didache.
Yeah.
All right, let's jump into it then. You want me to go first?
Always.
All right.
I tend to think that you have a plan.
No, I have
so
no
when
plan.
we're getting into it and you're just like, so let's do it. I'm like, yes.
Here's the thing. I have notes. I have no plan, because what I've frequently noticed is that even with all my notes, you could say something that just makes my brain go in a completely different direction, and then I'm off my notes. So I've learned to structure my notes around a lot of information that if we get talking on something, then I have something for it.
It's weird that we study to have a conversation.
Right?
Like, we want to be able to go back and forth on this. So we come with the information, but we're really just going back and forth on it.
Yeah.
But I know that you tend to have like your, cool, what is it? What are we doing here? And
yeah. So we'll look at today, what is the history of the Didache? And then I have 6 themes that I really saw are pulled from the Didache. So it's a moral instruction, baptism, prayer, the Eucharist, which is just communion, teachers, and then the apocalypse. So I think for today, we'll hit moral instruction and then what is the Didache. So for everyone listening, you'll at least know what it was, how it's come back into the fold, and where to kind of find a resource for it. And then we'll look at the moral instructions, kind of getting more into the book of the Didache itself. And I think it's 16 chapters. So for next episode, we'll get into the next 6, so 2 to 6, and then we'll tell that off with how can we still view the Didache in the church today.
Yeah.
That one should be a fun one too. So let's get rolling. What is the Didache?
The Didache, well, it's known as the Teaching of the 12 Apostles is the short title, right? But the full title would be The Teaching of the Lord to the Gentiles through the 12 Apostles. And I say Gentiles. Depending on what translation you pull up, it could be the teaching of the Lord to the heathens or the teaching of the Lord to the nations, which, in case you didn't know, Gentiles, heathens, nations, it means nations. It basically means not Jewish people. Sometimes you're like, oh, heathens. So, like, after they're doing things, they're like, yeah, because they're not Jewish. They're not following Yahweh.
Yeah, we really turned that into an insult.
Yeah, even my daughter the other day said something about like a heathen. I'm like, where'd you get? Oh, you probably got it from me, but
yeah. You know, I do it sometimes. Like if I'm messing with Justine and joking with the kids, I'm like, "Oh, you little heathens."
But I mean, it's the people who aren't following God. Yeah, following the other God, so to speak. So yeah, that'll get you into trouble. So yeah, it's the teaching of the 12.
Basically, inside of it, it's basic Christian principles for godly living, conversion, and then the rituals that happen within the church. Really, for me, I looked at it as a church manual or a handbook. Like basically, these are the ethics and church order that we have that the early church was using to give to new believers. And in a sense, I see it as today as like what we would call 101 or 201 classes in a lot of the major churches. They have these like, here's the introduction to Christianity type classes. So the Didache was really that. It was what the early church thought new Christians needed to learn as they made their way through the church.
Yeah, and in looking at that, of just how you're saying giving this teaching to Christians, this wasn't like a church manual in the aspect of later things that came, like here's church structure and kind of all the things on like how to run the church in that aspect. It was more of, you could almost even call it like a community manual, right? So as you're coming into the Christian community, here's as you said, the moral, how to live things out. And as we get into, there's the 2 ways, right? And you want to follow the right way. But then, as I said, some of the rituals that, hey, these are the things that we practice, and even to be aware of with, hey, there are teachers, and here's how you treat them, and here's how you should also be aware of some aspects of them. But I like it because what it is, as you're talking like a 101 type class or introductory type class, I like it because it gives here's how we live up front. It's not really so much of, here's some heady knowledge on things that you have to understand and believe, which I feel is kind of a distinction between maybe some modern Western churches, to where we tend to promote like, well, let's get into Romans and tear this thing up, and here's all these things that you need to believe about yourself and sin and salvation and all of these things. And the Didache really comes in like, cool, so there's the right way to live and there's the wrong way to live, and as a Christian you are following this path, and kind of leads on from there. So I like the practicality of it.
Yeah.
I really like the practicality of it.
So that's really what it is in a nutshell. When it was written, so again, the heading of it is the Lord's teaching to mine says heathen, by the 12 apostles. So when it was written is kind of up in the air. There is a time frame. It's between 50 to 150 AD. But it's really like, okay, if this was what the 12 taught everyone and it was from God, then it has to be around that 50 time frame, really closer, because like, the time to reflect Paul and James running the church, because they died around 60 AD. So it would kind of tie more into that time frame. But a lot of with it has been like, it's a compilation of things. So it's been not edited, but upgraded or changed here and there.
I think the edited is an appropriate term to use. We tend to, I feel like some people, when they hear edited, they're just like, oh, they changed it in a bad way and they took it away. But
bad thought of it.
Like, they're humans, right? And if you're compiling a book and you're pulling things in, like, an editing process happens to get it to a form that's appropriate, right? I don't have the view of inspiration to where it's, oh, God took over my body and gave me every single word to write perfectly in this thing, and like, that's just what it was. First draft, God's draft, right?
Yeah.
I tend to think that God can work through an editing process, even as you look at the Bible as a whole over the course of centuries, to where you can get notes that get added in. There was like, even that's what this thing is called today. So obviously someone's like, hey, I'm telling about that thing back then, and here's what it still is that thing.
Yeah, you see a lot of that in like Judges and Joshua and Samuel and kind of those books. Like, this is what that place is. Or even in Genesis, where like Abraham made a well right here, and this is what this place is today.
Right.
Yeah.
So I said that you see that happening in Scripture. Now, Didache, not quite Scripture, right? Wait. Let's stay on the date thing real quick before we get into that.
Get into that, because we could talk about the date, the origin, and then we'll get into that conversation with it. But yeah, it's difficult to really pin down. There's lack of hard evidence for it, and like I said, it's a compilation of things. There are some things though that really tend to lean more towards early in church time.
And I'm just gonna say, because I think I said it way back, this might have been some of the early podcast episodes. I think that this is a first century document. I think that it came very closely around the same time as all the rest of the writings. And even though I guess if you were to follow I keep getting ahead of myself.
Yeah.
I think it's an early writing.
It's an early writing. So there's some facts too.
I just really want to say, I think that it should be right in there alongside the Bible, even if you don't consider it canon. It should be the appendix that's included with everything. I just had to get it out. Cool. Dates. I think it's like around the 60s.
And we'll talk more about that thought process in the next episode. But to kind of back up your 60s thought process, the simplicity of the prayer, the form of church organization like bishops and deacons, the continued existence of traveling apostles and prophets, and then also resident ministers. All this reflects a time, like I said earlier, closer to Paul and James than it does like Ignatius or something.
Basically where the church had been established and then started to create like, cool, now these communities have been here for a bit. Here's how we're handling them out. This is definitely, it seems like more of the, hey, in the current form of this is the apostles, the 12 apostles going out and what they're teaching. They were still, it wasn't just the 12 going out, they were still sending out other teachers, and it was spreading and spreading and spreading. So between the church order that it kind of brings in, the community order, as you're saying, the teachings and whatnot, I think that it leads to earlier, as well as when you look at some of it from things that I studied, is that it really looks like it was sourced from a lot more of Jewish thought, like really using the Talmud as some of the background for it and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. And whereas you see the early church had much more of that Jewish thought to it versus later on when things, kind of more to the Gentiles, to those heathens, and, got away from that a little
Yeah.
bit, which again, the apostles being Jews and kind of relying on that and putting it out. That's where I don't see maybe later on. I think you said 150 was kind of
The max.
the max
Yeah.
out there. I really see the church at that time being a lot more Greek influenced and away from the Hebrew way of even presenting things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of people place it at. Like I said earlier, it was believed to have been written by the 12, suggested by the title, but the author is unknown. And then because of the revisions, there's just so much to it.
Real quick, I know I came across for dating that like around 130 was a really popular take.
Yeah.
Did you have like a why?
No, I never saw why, but I
I
saw
just
a
know I
lot.
kept seeing that pop up, but then when I would look
Yeah.
at other evidence, I was like, it really doesn't seem like that. But
I,
130 for some reason really
I
seemed.
think this might give a good answer to it. Why? I read a quote from one of the commentaries on it by Dr. C. Taylor, and he says the primitive church had, instead of the New Testament, a body of teachings, which was at first, from the nature of the case, wholly unwritten, so basically spoken.
Yeah.
To this, St. Paul alludes when he lays down that a bishop must be blameless, holding to the faithful words which according to the teaching, that's in Titus. And then Justin Martyr again expressly refers to it as speaking of Christ as attested by the words of the teaching and the prophets to him. And then the teaching would sometimes be spoken of as the Lord's, and after a while as the apostles. So you see that in 2 John 9 and then Acts 2:42. Just as the Jews spoke of the Torah absolutely, and the Torah of Moses and of the Lord.
And yeah, okay, I can kind of see that. I think part of it too that came to my mind is where you've got, as you kind of talked about the structure, is you have that first part that's called the two ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's looked at being almost separate than some of the other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they're looking at dating, and again, the composition, because you see that two ways pop up in a lot of areas, whereas the other part kind of getting added into it. It's like, yeah, when was it written? I think that 130 might have been that composition date.
Yeah.
Because as you were saying, what was actually being taught.
Already said.
So that's where, for me, okay, the Didache as a written document might have been 130. I think that probably is written down before then. But I think that what is within it was definitely happening in the first century, which to me is the more important. I could say something today, and if it gets written down in 15 years, I still said it today, and we're running with it today.
It's almost like when you look at the Gospel of Luke to Matthew and the Sermon on the Mount and the Sermon on the Plain. What you notice, like the Sermon on the Mount is basically scattered throughout like chapters of Luke's Gospel. And it's not like the consistent teaching like the Sermon on the Mount. So it's like understanding that Jesus was kind of going around saying these things in his 3-year time frame.
He was a
over
traveling
and over,
preacher.
Yeah. So the Didache could be looked at in the same way in those beginning years. This is what the early church leaders are going around telling everyone. This is what they're being taught. And then someone was like, it would just be easier if we put this down on pen and paper. And, some people viewed it as non-canonical, like you were saying, like you wanted, like in the appendix. I mean, we talked about this the other day. We were joking, right? Like, why do the Bibles have like all those maps of where Paul traveled? This would be way more important than like where Paul traveled. So it's, although it was viewed non-canonical, the Didache has some level of authority in the early church, as it was part of a collection known as the Apostolic Fathers.
Yeah, and those Apostolic Fathers, it's a collection of the early Christian writings, normally included the Didache, which are covering First Clement, Second Clement, Barnabas, the letters of Ignatius, the letters of Polycarp to the Philippians, the Shepherd of Hermas, which we are going to be covering in a few episodes, and then the writings of Papias, which, Papias?
No, it's a funny Papias.
Yeah, the Italian guy. Him and Malici.
Yeah, him and Malici, the two Italians.
Yeah, looking at them, they are all within, up to, 150, 160-ish?
Yeah, I have a 80 AD through about 220 would be around that time with all those writings.
Okay. Yeah, some of those guys, even when you're looking at knowing who wrote the New Testament. Sorry, I just watched a TikTok on this about like, they said that we don't know who wrote the New Testament. And I know that Papias, he wrote some stuff, and the other guys are just like, hey, yeah, when Matthew wrote this, or Mark was going around with Peter, and he wrote down what Peter was talking about, and even though it wasn't really written in order, and just, so again, these early church writings, when you hear about different things, we tend to trust these people.
Yeah, which is weird because a lot of times nowadays they don't.
That's what's weird. I was talking with Josiah about this, because if it was any other ancient document, this is the kind of stuff that you're like, oh man, look at it's so well attested. There's all these people talking about it, and look at the time frames and all this stuff. But it's the Bible, so we're like, oh no, that they're just supporting it for some weird reason.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah.
Clement, Origen, and Didymus the Blind used it as scripture. So when they used it, they used the Didache as scripture.
Oh, interesting. It's almost like it should be in the Bible.
It's mentioned by Eusebius and Athanasius. They regarded it both as a good book for new Christians to read. So no copy was really known to come into existence until 1873. And that's where the Didache kind of was discovered and popped out, but it wasn't published to 1883. So the story of how it was found was really interesting. You want to get into that?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, it was discovered in 1873 by Philotheos Bryennios, and he was a guy that, for me, he was almost like a Michael Heiser of his day. He was a scholar, and kind of his story is where he was growing up. He was spotted as being a bright guy, so he got sponsored to be able to go and get involved in seminary and get taught on these things and go on these, travel. And they're like, cool, you did as much here, let you get you plugged in somewhere else. And again, just sponsorship coming through it. So he was a bright guy, and he just had a hunger to get into these things. And I guess he was looking through this codex, right? So to jump forward from, cool, he got sponsored, he was smart, and then he gets to the spot and he finds this codex, and he's going through, and this is a known document that people have had, but he's just the guy that's actually taking it page by page to read it, to see what's in there. Because everyone else does what I would do with the document. Kind of when I use my Bible software, I'm like, cool, I want to find out something about this. I'm not going to read every page in this thing. I just want to know about this. So everyone else is doing that, whereas this guy's like, let me look at all of the pages. And he comes across the Didache.
Yeah.
Which is just the find of a century, because when was the last time that it was referenced? It was in like 1100 or something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
So here you have in 1800, so it was at least 700 years that this thing was out of contact. He comes across it, and like you said, he kept it secret for 7 years as he went through. And was he translating it during that time?
I think he was studying and translating it for during that time, which is crazy too. It's because during this time of it, there was mentions of it in other workings. Like we said, Clement, Origen, Didymus the Blind, Eusebius, all these people of the early church history were mentioning this document that was like really important to them. And then it was just like nowhere to be found. There was fragments of it. So there was it was known.
That's when they know, like, oh, part of the two ways and different stuff. Yeah.
So there were fragments of it, but there was never this complete manuscript of it. And well, there was, but no one was reading it because no one was looking for it.
I'm like, it's in the Vatican Library. We need Nicolas Cage.
Yeah, we do. National Treasure reference. I love it. I really like those movies.
Yeah,
too.
they're pretty fun.
Yeah, it's way better than going Da Vinci Code route with it.
Yeah, it really is.
What was Tom? Dude,
I think that's probably some of the only Nicolas Cage that I like, but I don't want to digress on any of that stuff. But
one thing I'm gonna digress in is what was happening with Tom Hanks's hair during the Da Vinci Code. It looked like Nicolas Cage's hair. I wonder if he was going for like I'm Nicolas Cage of this. Anyways, go ahead. I digress too much.
Anyways, he finds it. Again, this is just the find. It's because to me, man, it's the 1800s. It's 1873 that he finds it. That's Reformation has already happened. Like the dudes going through the Reformation don't have this book, and it's just one of those things that when we read the Old Testament, it's like, oh, if you want to know more about that, read it in the Annals of the King and stuff. And all right, so the Didache isn't mentioned in the New Testament, but we have all these other guys talking about it. And then here it is. It's just such a cool discovery, and I really, really like this book. So thank you, Philotheos. We are honoring you as well, my scholarly friend.
Yes, for finding it. Thomas O'Laughlin. He has the Didache, A Window on the Earliest Christians.
That is a good book.
It is a great resource. This is why I'm mentioning it and not just ripping from it like I do a lot of other things. So if you want more information and really to tell the story of what happened, go and read that book. I'm going to just
use our podcast as a primer, but go read that book and you'll get cool.
You'll get the really deep stuff. I'm going to read just a portion of it because as a commentary of the book, he also story tells with it. Which I find is fantastic. So he said, it's the stuff scholars dream of, the plot of hundreds of films. A young library-bound academic turns over the leaf of an ancient manuscript, and there before his eyes is a long-lost text. People had heard of it and wondered about it, but now, without a doubt, he has found it. It's a eureka moment. The scholar's life will change from obscurity behind bookshelves. He will become world famous. Indeed, the whole discipline will be changed by his discovery. What has he found in this ancient handwritten codex? A booklet used in the very first decades of his religion. It's older than most of his religion's most famous records and gives a completely new slate of how its adherents lived their lives, saw themselves, and expressed their beliefs. It is a short text and deceptively simple, but it will cause an earthquake that will shake thousand-year-old certainties, beginning a revolution that changes the way a worldwide religion looks at its most august books and thinks about its own origins. The only element from the movie that is missing in this story is that of a secret plan to hide the discovery and destroy the evidence. It seems too bizarre to be true, but that, in a nutshell, is the story of the discovery of the Didache in 1873.
Like the secret plot. I'm just thinking, the Vatican Library.
Yeah. Nicolas Cage, get him on it. But yeah, I just really love the way he painted the picture of this discovery because it is. And the fact that you can go to so many people in church today, and I'm going to talk more about this in the next episode, but you could go to, I would say, over 99% of people in the church today, even including pastors, and say, what's the Didache? And they're going to be like, I don't know, what's the Didache with you? Because it's not really taught anymore. So it's not even looked at as a resource for our faith.
Yeah, that's why I'm so thankful to Pastor Bruce, the guy that was coming up under when I first came back into the church, because he introduced it to me. And I think we were looking at the baptism section, because the baptism section is really interesting because we're a Baptist church, and just some teasers is it talks about, fully immerse them. But if you don't have that much water, just throw some water on their head.
Yeah, and it's also supposed to be in cold water.
Yeah, living water, so to speak. Yeah, so there's just levels of, hey, here's the most ideal, but also, hey, if you can make it happen, that's what's the most important. So yeah, I remember I think that's why he showed it to me. I just remember reading through it. So I've been aware of it for a while because it's not like an Enoch type book. I remember just reading it and it makes sense when you read it. And you're like, oh yeah, okay.
Oh,
it's kind of like James.
Simple,
To me, it's like a James book.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people say that it pulls from James. So I think that's a good spot to split this episode. So we'll split this episode and save the rest of the conversation for the next episode. So I'm Chris.
I'm Yurla.
We're your church friends. Thanks for listening. Has your once youthful face vanished into an unknown older reflection? All the wrinkles telling the story of an aged face. Do you wish you could bring back the shining glow you once had? Then get ready to feel born again with the Beatitude Beauty Products new face mask, the Noah. You trusted them with your hair when they gave you the Peacemaker shampoo and conditioner and the Nazarite shampoo. Well, now you can trust them with the skin on your face. The Noah face mask deeply cleans and removes impurities that can lead to the way of death and restoring your face to the way of life. That old woman face will be rejuvenated back to those young woman looks the more you use Noah's face mask with faith. Simply apply the Noah face mask 7 times a day for 16 days straight to have a smooth, new face glow. Age will only be a number as your youthful radiance returns with the Noah face mask. So rush to your nearest big box retailer to get yours today.
Noah face mask isn't actually sold in stores or FDA approved. Do not use the Noah face mask if you are pregnant, nursing, have back pains, have a heart condition, have recently received a vaccine, have had dental work, or if you simply enjoy having two nostrils and existing. Noah has been known to cause horns to grow from your head, a third eye to appear, cartoon-like features, hunger, and cat scratch fever.
Excluded books of the Bible.